Good morning. It is nice to be with you all this morning. I want to thank Dwight Beery for playing the piano for us this morning, and Stan Beery for running the tech for us as well. Give a short introduction for you. My name is Travis Hartman. I was at Camp Mac for about 15 years. So most of my adult life there, working in their maintenance department. About a year ago, I transitioned to being the pastor of the North Liberty Church of the Brethren. So up around the South Bend-ish area, if anyone knows the area very well. So I've been there for not quite a year. It'll be a year the end of this month. And it is nice to be back down here. I was here a few times for camp, and then it's been a little bit since I've been able to make it back down, so it's a joy to be back here with you in person. And for the sermon this morning, I'm going to read a few verses. One will be out of Chronicles, and then one will be out of Ephesians later on. But with the month that we're in, I wanted to think about thankfulness. And you'll probably hear a few thankfulness sermons, I'm guessing, throughout this month. But this is kind of the idea of becoming a thankful person. How do we work at making that our position in life? And I believe some of this boils down to whether we are optimistic or if we are a pessimistic person. I'd like to think that I'm more optimistic, but I think I know better. I'm probably close to down the middle. I don't get too much one way or the other. But I never expect everything to go very well. I expect there to be problems along the way. So I think I'd have to be more of a slightly pessimistic person. The problem is I know that probably gets in the way of being thankful as much as I should be, and recognizing those blessings as much as I should. So this is a sermon that I know I need to work on as well, or a message I know I need to work at. And hopefully you can gain some from this also. And we're going to look at, it's 1 Chronicles chapter 16, and I'm just going to read verse 34 here, and then we'll explain kind of what was going on. But 1 Chronicles 16:34 says, "So give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever." And as we get our way up to chapter 16, what's happening here at the end is they are praising God because they were able to move the Ark of the Covenant. They have now brought it to Jerusalem, and they can worship in the presence of God in their minds. This wasn't their first attempt. Earlier in chapter 13, if you read through all of that, David decides that, we're just going to go ahead and move it. So he gets everyone around, and they take off to move the ark, which again seems like a reasonable idea. Let's get the ark back to where we are so we can worship with God. The problem was David did not consult God in any sort of way. He also didn't go and figure out the instructions for how to move the ark, because it had been laid down, here's what you're supposed to do. And so David, what he's doing doesn't seem wrong necessarily. They get a cart around, they put the ark on this cart, and they start heading off. And as they're moving on their way, they hit a bump, things start to wobble a little bit, and there was a very unlucky man named Uzzah who was right there, who reached out to stop the ark from falling over, and he dropped dead immediately. Now, of course, this caused some problems then. The people realize there is an issue, we're going to stop. Things grind to a halt. They leave the ark where it is. David knows something is wrong and he needs to figure it out. But either way, they're not going any farther with this ark. So they more or less abandon it in the city along the way, and they go back, and David regroups. He figures out what was going on. He figures out how he was supposed to move the ark. There were very specific rules on all of this. It was supposed to be carried on poles by Levites. And not only Levites, had to be specific families within the Levites. So there were very specific rules on how this was all to take place. And God expected them to follow those rules. But David, either not thinking about it, or really just wanting to do this, because it seemed like the right thing to do, didn't follow through on some of those things. So they had a very disastrous first attempt on trying to get the ark into Jerusalem so they could worship. They had still set up places of worship, but they really felt that the ark was the presence of God. And if they really wanted to worship and have God be there with them, they needed the ark. And so once he had figured all of this out, that gets us to chapter 16, and they have successfully moved the ark now. So this is a great joy for them. And there's about 30 verses of a prayer, or a psalm, if you would like to call it that, from David. And throughout this psalm, he uses the word thanks 3 different times. The last one we read there in 1634. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. But he also uses similar language throughout the entire passage. He uses the terms of praising God and remembering God's wonderful deeds, remembering God's covenant, proclaiming good tidings of God's salvation, and the idea of telling of God's glory. It is a recurring theme throughout that prayer of being thankful to God. And I think this is one of the ways that we become more thankful people, is that we make sure that we are regularly giving thanks. Again, there's at least, I'd say, a dozen times in those 30 verses or so that he thanks God or praises God or recognizes God for what has just been done. And so if we kind of focus on the good things that God has done for us, we should be pretty thankful people. Part of our issues as human beings is we get caught up on more of the negative things at times, or it's a little easier to complain than to be thankful. My children, I have 2 children, I could have included that in the introduction. They're now 12 and 9, a little boy named Micah who's 12, a little girl named Kylie who is 9. And when they were younger, there was a Berenstain Bears book that they really liked, and it was called Gets the Gimmies. Now, this is a very good book on thankfulness because the bear cubs want everything. They want all the new toys. They want all the new games, and just kind of keep snowballing until in the story their grandparents come over, and instead of anything else, any sort of greeting, the first thing they say is, "What did you bring me?" And that's where the parents decide we've got a problem. And so they really kind of stop that, and they explain being thankful for what you have, not wanting everything you see. A lot of the things we try and teach our own children throughout life. And so it's very easy for us to get caught up in what we think we might need or what we think we could have, and to not focus as much on how we have been blessed. So I think it's important that we regularly give thanks. And also here out of 1 Chronicles, I think it's important that we are thankful when everything's going well. I know as a younger, healthier person at the moment, I just kind of expect things to be okay. That's just the stage I am in life, is that you just kind of expect things are all right most of the time. But I really need to stop and thank God for the things that I have. The fact that I am in fairly good health. The fact that I have a job that provides for what I need. That my kids are healthy. That they're going to school. That the school is being safe and making them wear masks. There's any number of things that I should be thanking him for much more consistently that I probably just take for granted as, well, that's how life should be. And so it's important that I stop, and I think that we all stop and realize what we do have that's going well, and making sure that we're thankful to God for those things. And I want to read a couple of verses out of Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians 5:19 and 20 says, "As you sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs among yourselves, singing and making melody to the Lord in your hearts, give thanks to God the Father at all times and for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ." Verse 20 uses the phrasing, "and to give thanks for God for everything." So we need to acknowledge God during those difficult times as well. I don't think we thank God for the good difficult time. I'm not going to make it that far. But I think we thank God for his presence during those difficult times. Because we're all going to go through times, and again, I'm fairly young, and I've had times where I don't really feel like thanking God for what I'm going through. And through conversations, I know that only gets a little bit more as you get older. You've been through more things, you've seen more things. Life kind of beats on us a little bit. And there are the times where we're not exactly thrilled with how things are going. And so I'm not going to say we thank God for the bad times, but we thank God for his presence in those bad times and trust that we can rely on him when we're going through those. Because I very much believe that God can do good in any circumstance. I think that we have to be a part of making sure that it turns into something good. And I think there are situations from my life I'm still waiting to see what that good is. Or maybe I've missed what the good was because I wasn't paying enough attention. So that's another area where I think we need to work a little bit. But I do believe that God is with us in our difficult times also. That God grieves with us when we grieve, he mourns when we mourn, and he celebrates when we celebrate. So we need to be thankful that he is there with us. Because as we all seem to know, and people know fairly early, life isn't always fair. I've already had to field that question with my kids several times, and they'd be like, "Well, Dad, that's not fair." Unfortunately, life isn't always fair. There are going to be things that are more difficult. But again, making sure we don't get caught up in the idea of, well, this isn't fair, I'm going to gripe and complain, and try and make sure we move into that area of being thankful for what we have, thanking God for being there, and not getting caught up on some of those negative things. And then, so what do we do with this? What does this look like then if we're trying to be a little bit more thankful in our lives? As I was thinking about this, some simple things, we could make a list of here's what I know I've been blessed with, or here's what's going well for me right now. You can talk with family or friends about, hey, here's something that I see that's going well. And often family and friends might recognize other things that you're being blessed by that we might have just forgotten or overlooked. And I think it's important also that we're sharing with one another in situations like that. Because one, the church should be encouraging one another in situations like that. When we express blessing by God, hopefully that encourages others and also gets them thinking about how they have been blessed by God. And so that's one of the important parts that I think that the church does play. At my own church, we do have a time of sharing of joys and concerns. And I think most churches I've ever been a part of have something like that. And it's to make sure that we are, one, praying for the needs of those around us, but also we need to make sure we're hitting up some of those joys maybe a little harder than we do. and being thankful for what God has done and provided for us. I really appreciated at my church a few weeks back. One of the men just during Joys and Concerns expressed how thankful he was just for the church in general and for the encouragement he received and for the fact that he runs the food pantry up there and for the fact that the church helps out so much with that. And just, it was a good reminder amongst all the other concerns that were being mentioned as well, that we are still very blessed people and that God is very much working and blessing us no matter how much we might miss it at times or how difficult times might be. And so then again, I think it's also important that we stop and kind of recognize our own situations. And that's part of the idea of making a list too, is that we realize, okay, here's what is going well. Here's what God has done. And here's what I can be thankful for. And so I think we should be trying to make thankfulness more of our default position. And I know I've met some people that very much are in that spot, that are very good about being thankful and recognizing it. And I hope to be better at that myself. I hope to be one of those kinds of people, because when you meet those people, they're very encouraging as well. So there's a lot that can be gained from that. And then I think also being thankful gets us outside of our own smaller situations. You know, it helps us to realize more of what's going on around us. I'll share another story that really kind of called me out a little bit. I was fairly frustrated about some things, and I was preaching some sermons on frustrations and anxieties. And one of those mornings, we have a family who's adopted some little boys from Haiti, and they just mentioned we need to make sure we're praying for Haiti and all the stuff that is going on there. And it really hit me going, boy, I'm concerned about some of these small things. When, boy, look at what's going on there in Haiti. Or, you know, we could pick any number of other countries around the world and realize how greatly blessed I am, even if I have some small frustrations right now. So that was a very good reminder that I received from someone in my church, that there's a lot going on. And so if we get too caught up in ourselves, we miss some of the things we should be thankful for. And so during this Thanksgiving month, we'll call it, since we've got a little bit here, just want to encourage you to try and work at being thankful, because I think it's something that we all can work a little bit better at, and to just recognize those areas where God is blessing us. If you'd join me in prayer. Our gracious and loving God, we are thankful for the many things that you have provided for us, the many blessings that you give us. Help us to recognize those and to be thankful for those, and to encourage one another as well in that. And we just ask now that you would bless the rest of the days that we have before us, and we're thankful that we can gather this morning. And it's in Jesus' name. Amen.